I think most people feel really lonely when you want something that doesn't currently exist. And so some people call that dreams, some people call that goals, whatever it is. You're trying to pull something from your mind into reality and you want it done a certain way. And if it's not done that way, it's not what you imagined. And so people on the outside will throw stones and call you names that they think will change your behavior and get you to stop. And the more I have been the person trying to pull things into reality, the more I've tried to weather and build kind of defenses against those things so that when those stones get hurled at you by being called a control freak or by saying you micromanage things or that you have incredibly high standards, the answer is yes, because I want it done right the first time. Because either way, if you have enough will, it's going to get done the way that I want it to get done regardless. And it'll be less painful if we just do it right the first time, because we will still have to do it. And you may have to do it 3 or 4 more times, but eventually you will just succumb to the fact that we're going to do it this way. And I think all of the great things that have happened for humanity have been from one man or woman who had an idea and just wouldn't let people shake it from them.
The standard of right isn't actually that insane when you think about it. It's just right. It's just done without error. And I guess that the margin that some people consider to be right and other people consider to be right just changes.
I'm trying to think of a really good example for this, but like the level of detail, I mean, it's the difference between a book that gets 10 or 100 5-star reviews and a book that gets 100,000 5-star reviews. And everyone wants a silver bullet, but most of the things that make great products is 100 golden BBs. And so that's one of those things we have is there's no silver bullets, only hundreds of golden BBs. There's just hundreds of tiny little improvements. It's like, how can we look at the can? How can we improve the way it ships? What about the weight? What about the color scheme? How does it sit on the shelves? How are people going to look at it in this market versus this market? Or like, how does this name appear on hats and on shirts and on sites? And what's the RGB, whatever the color scope is here versus there? And it's just 1,000 details that someone who does not care will not put the work to look into because they're trying to check a box rather than to make something that people will love. Or I heard this from, I can't remember who it was from. But basically that the best art is art where the artist makes it for themselves. And where you see commercial work is where a bunch of people are trying to make something for an audience. And so they're trying to like rinse and recycle stuff that actually solves no one's problems because no one is actually the audience. Whereas when you make it for yourself, there's thousands of people just like you who will have the same depth of understanding of it, but it feels selfish in the moment to make something for yourself. But when you make it for yourself, you actually make it for everyone.
But you can be reliably informed that there's some non-insignificant minority of people who also think like you.
Yes.
Who also have the same problems as you, who also have the same fears as you. Yeah. So I'm going through 2 projects at the moment, one being a book and the other being Eutonic, that is nascent. And it's new.
Yeah.
And that means that there's lots more of these small things that are actually quite big things.
Yeah.
But I was telling you before we started about the fact there's a hyphen, and there's a hyphen missing between one piece of copy and another piece of copy, but it's printed on 1 million cans.
You're right.
And for fuck's sake. But being concerned about being seen as someone who has too high standards is something that for quite a while I felt ashamed about.
Yeah.
Because you feel like a bother. You feel like you're being unnecessarily, it's not even detail oriented, it's picky.
Cumbersome, yeah.
Yes, laborious.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, probably last year, it took me until last year to realize that not succumbing to stopping doing that is probably one of the only reasons why I've had any success.
I mean, I think for anyone who's listening, if you have that, I would consider it a gift. It makes sense for the majority of people to be opposed to that because you do make more work for everyone else. But the product of that work is so much better. And so if you want the work that you have to last and to be meaningful and make an impact, it comes from 100 golden BBs of 100 particularities, of 100 peculiarities that you are picky about because the whole thing needs to work. And what happens is if you have a big project, lots of people have to get involved, but there still needs to be one vision. And otherwise it looks like a Frankenstein where everyone just checks a box of something they did in the past. They just copy and paste it over. And then it doesn't resonate with anyone because again, They just did it for everyone rather than for the artist. And so using that as a frame has given me permission to be me in an unreasonable world. And so like I told this last time I was on, but when I did the book launch, I practiced that presentation 3 times a day, every day for 30 days. So I did 100 run-throughs, full length run-throughs. First where I did it out loud and recorded it. Second time where I would watch the recording and then edit in real time and then do it again. And I did that every single day. And so then when I came live and had 500,000 people or whatever, it came out, I think, flawlessly. But people were like, man, you're such a natural at this. It's like, well, I did it 100 times. And so sometimes people even hear 100 and it's just a big number. But when you do 100 repetitions of something, the first 5 times you're like, wow, I'm so much better. But then like the difference between 5 and the next 95 times is what goes from being great to being a masterpiece. And like it's that next 95 that I think is what makes people world class. And that's where everyone falls off. And that's why most people aren't.
There is this pull, I think, from people who don't have high standards to people who do have high standards to drag them back. It's this like moving back toward the mean is killing the only competitive advantage that you had.
Couldn't agree more. It's conforming, right? It's like people want you to do what they find comfortable, and most things that are like most companies deteriorate when the founder leaves and it happens slowly because you go from 100 golden BBs to 99 golden BBs and it doesn't look that different. And then there's 98 golden BBs and they're like, I don't know. And then 2 years later, 3 years later, you're like, I don't know. It doesn't have the same like magic as what it was. And that's because the art behind it isn't there because it's not unified anymore. It's not congruent anymore. It's 100 departments making decisions with people copying, pasting things for an audience that doesn't exist rather than one person who's trying to be satisfied for an ideal that they are trying with all their might to live up to.
I suppose this is one of the important reasons to have a singular figure that is the hub and all of the spokes come off it, because they're the only person that gets to see absolutely everything. And typically that would be the founder. In a podcast, that would be a host. In a solo music band, that would be the lead singer or the songwriter or whatever. They get to see everything. For instance, we've done some episodes before where it's been the night before and I've been not happy with the color grade because the way that something displays on mobile is slightly different to the way that it displays in Premiere Pro, and it's slightly different to the way that it displays in a 6K videographer's curved screen. I've gone, guys, it's not up to scratch. Well, we're not going to be able to get it in time for the export. We're not going to be able to get it in time to get it uploaded, and then there's checks that go through on YouTube.
Right.
Like, well, it needs to happen. Like, it just find a way to make this happen. And yeah, that impulse of just actually seeing it as something that you should lean into. Okay, well, it's not. And if you set the standard and if everybody else gets up to that standard, what it shows is the people who continually push up against that and don't meet that standard, they're just not built for this particular company. They're built for someone else that makes a mediocre product, but they're not built for you, who's making a world-class product.
And I really want to jam down someone's throat right now. The whole like, don't be a perfectionist. Like it's just another word for procrastination. Mm-hmm. I actually think that's complete bullshit. I think that's
my quote.
Is it?
Perfectionism is procrastination masquerading as quality control.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So then I'm gonna put a footnote on it that I think will add context, which is that most people who claim to be perfectionists are not perfectionists. They're actually procrastinating because they're not doing anything.
Correct.
And so it just is a socially acceptable label because the real perfectionists feel this sickness where they like want to itch their skin off until the thing's done, but they are trying to get it done. Whereas the perfectionist or the procrastinator uses that to say, like, I'm not sure, I'm just getting it right. But like the person who's an actual perfectionist, one wants to finish and is working every hour of every day on the thing and seeing progress towards it. Because if you don't know how your thing is getting better, you're not a perfectionist, you're just ignorant.
They're also moving toward the goal every single step of the way, as opposed to just sitting back. I had this huge list of things that are not doing the thing. Planning to do the thing isn't doing the thing. Thinking about the thing isn't doing the thing. Getting angry at people on the internet that have already done the thing isn't doing the thing. And there's also a people who are perfectionists within the thing that matters most are prepared to see things that are ancillary to that. For instance, you're not absolutely a perfectionist, I'm going to guess, with the short form content that goes out on your Instagram. It's like, this is sawdust, as you call it. This is just, it's extra, right? It's freebie stuff. Look, if we have 1 in 100 videos that have got a typo or the hyphens missing or something like that, all right. But if we're talking about the school announcement release, if there's a fucking typo in that, or if in the video one of the links is broken, or even if one of the links is slightly pixelated, that's something that I can have a problem with. So picking your battles as a perfectionist, I think actually, or someone with high standards, is super important, because you can't have that degree of high standards at absolutely everything, because if you don't pick your battles, you're not going to make sufficient movement at the velocity you need to actually make progress. So find the areas that are the highest contribution.
Yeah. And
don't compromise on those.
And it's funny you say that, because the way that I immediately reframed that was that the perfectionism was around volume. Is like, that is what we are optimizing towards. And then we can't, because if we knew how people responded ahead of time to content, then we would make things differently than we do. But I, probably like you, am often surprised, pleasantly and sometimes unpleasantly, by the stuff that just grabs hold and then just goes, viral as hell in content. And so I think part of that is making up for our own ignorance by increasing volume. And so that would be like my reframe on the perfectionism there is like, we know that if we make 10 pieces of content, it is more likely that we will have more people see it than if we try really hard at one. And so we make 10 because the net benefit of the 10 is greater. Correct. And so that's the ideal that we commit to.
Tiago Forte has a fantastic take on this, where he talks about perfectionism allows people to sit back and not produce work at a rate required to work out what actually works.
Have you heard the story of the pottery class? Oh, I feel like all right, wow. This feels like total modern wisdom.
Is this where someone comes in behind and then holds the thing in front?
So there's there's a teacher, and he's got 2 classes that he teaches. And one class, he says, the only assignment for this whole semester is that you come back with a perfect clay pot. That's it. That's the assignment. The other class, he says, your objective is to make the most total quantity of clay pots, and you'll be measured by how many pots you make. And at the end of the quarter, the pots that came from the team that had to just make sheer volume, not only did they make more pots, but the quality of all of their pots was better compared to the teams that only had to make one. And it just underlines the biggest lesson that I've learned in my life, which is that volume negates luck, is that you can try to be lucky and pick the one perfect thing and try and make it. But if you don't want to try and be lucky, you can just do so much fucking work that you will brute force your way to figuring it out. Like if you do 1,000 podcasts, you'll be pretty fucking good at podcasts, right? But if you try to say, okay, you're brand new, and all you have to do is make one perfect podcast. The problem is that you don't have the perspective from which to make a judgment to say what is good, because you have zero data to base anything off of. And so you're basing your idea of a perfect podcast on something that you've literally never done before. And so doing the volume gives you the perspective to then have the best podcast at number 1,000 or 1,001.